Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. She is, among other things, a TEDx speaker, an empathy and leadership expert, and author of the book titled Empathic Leader, My Mistake, not empathetic. The Empathic Leader, How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation. She has degrees including a doctorate in education, interdisciplinary leadership from Creighton University, and earlier a doctorate in music from the University of Kansas. So, with more than 20 years of experience across different industries, Melissa helps leaders see that empathy isn't soft, it's a powerful driver of performance, innovation, and culture. So, Melissa, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mark, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. I apologize for my little slip up on the title of the book. I don't necessarily believe in editing out my mistakes, but again, it's the empathic leader, and we're going to talk a lot in the second half of the episode about empathy and leadership. And I know from the pre-call, if you remember chatting about this, Melissa, that I'm going to declare that I think today's episode is going to go to 11.
Yes.
We have a shared we have a shared appreciation. This is not like up to the level of your doctoral degree, but if you want to tell the audience what band and now movies that we have a shared appreciation for.
Oh, I'm all about Spinal Tap. Love and turning it up to 11. Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we figured out we had that in common, I was like, "Oh, this is going to go well. This is going to be fun." So,
And I
yeah,
don't remember how we stumbled into that. I'm glad we did. That's a fun connection point.
I don't know, but I guess it was meant to be because otherwise, how would it have come up?
And as they say in the first movie, maybe related to how I stumbled across that or we stumbled across it, it's a fine line between stupid and
Oh
clever.
no.
It's a fine
Yes.
line between stupid and clever.
Yes.
But you didn't study rock music at University of Kansas. What did you study?
I studied French horn. I was a classical musician, so it was Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, the good old boys.
But everybody can be a bit of a tap head, I guess, regardless.
Oh, yes. Well, there's one part in the movie where they're going through the under part of the theater, and they're
Right.
like you remember it? And they're, like, going through this maze, and they're going, and they're going, and I'm like, "Yes, that's like every theater I've ever been in." I can't tell you how many times I've been lost in, like, these old vaudeville theaters where you just go around and around, and you might end up in the pit, you might end up in the balcony, you might end up in the lobby, and that's, like, one of my favorite scenes of all time.
The a common mistake of getting lost backstage, apparently.
Yes, and it's more common than maybe people let on.
Well, all right. Well, that's good to know. We have that in common. Maybe at least somebody else listening does as well. But so instead of talking about backstage mistakes, maybe I don't think we stole your story here. But the different things you've done in different aspects of your career, Melissa. What's your favorite mistake?
So, I would never ever have admitted this at the time, but and even sometimes now I'm like, but I think it was actually deciding to leave my music career,
Hmm.
which was that was a tough decision because I was in my early 40s when that happened, but and even at the time, I was like, "Oh my god, what am I doing? I don't know how to do anything else. I don't know how to do anything but play French horn and tour and do that," which is it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice, and on the other hand, it's not like there's a ton of openings for it.
So
Even a yeah.
it's a rare talent, a rare skill to develop and be able to be a professional. Tell us more about that career and what was it gradual or was there kind of a sudden realization that you were going to leave that career behind?
There was definitely a catalyst, but it took a long time for me to come to terms with it. I was a performing musician first and, and I loved it. I got to play with people like Ray Charles, I got to play with David Ogden Stiers, I got to, meet people and go places and do things that I just wouldn't have otherwise. It's not like these people were in my sphere of influence.
Yeah.
The problem with being a performing musician is it's not always very stable, and I needed things like benefits and solid
Mhm.
paychecks, and,
Mm.
I like food, shelter, and clothing, so I got my first doctorate and went to become a French horn professor, and unfortunately, within my very first term, I was assaulted by a colleague,
Oh,
and things just unraveled over the next 7 years. But because I was so caught up in trying to hang on to that position, I didn't handle things well. The thing is there was a series of mistakes before I got to the end of it all. And it took 7 years before I finally had to say, "I have to walk away, that I can't do this anymore." And that's what happened. But it took me a long time to actually come to terms with the fact that my mental health was worth more than me continuing in that field.
wow. Did others make mistakes at a, let's say, administration level in how they respond? Did they, and how they responded to this? Did they not believe you? Did they not hold the assaulter accountable?
Oh, yeah.
And
He
I,
still has his job there. So, yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of covering. The system itself was toxic. The people in the system, I think, were bound in this toxic system. Because that's actually how I started getting on this idea of empathy, because I felt like just nobody wanted to hear it and nobody wanted to understand, and I didn't understand what was going on in this system, that I couldn't seem to get my point across. But I mean, when I went to our boss, I was told that if I was gonna be stirring up trouble like that, I was never going to get tenure, especially as a junior female faculty member. And then when I went to his boss, I was told if I didn't like it, I should just leave. There's not a lot of French horn professorships. I mean, where was I gonna go? And I mean, I went to everybody I could think of on campus,
Mhm.
but I never reported it outside of campus because I was so concerned about hanging on to that job.
Wow. And I guess not wanting to fall back on like, well, if they fire me, there's probably a big lawsuit. You weren't think I mean, you were thinking like, I want to keep that teaching position because the
Right.
love the love of music, the love of teaching.
Exactly.
Unfortunate thing to hear about the circumstances and the response.
Yeah. The sad thing is that as I talk to more and more people, but women in particular, that have been in similar positions, it's kind of a standard response, unfortunately, and in academia in particular. You'd think, these big, lofty, brilliant places would be more open to understanding about some of this, but they're almost worse because they work so hard to I shouldn't say that. It's never everybody, but, there are those that are more concerned about their reputation and holding tightly to that control, and unfortunately, it creates some really toxic situations.
Yes. And that yeah, that's unfortunate to hear, and it's I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate to hear because, and I say this not in the disparaging way that some people use the term, but, people say, well, universities are woke. They're supposed to look after women in particular or believe women when they've been assaulted, not protect assaulters. Like I'm saying like, they should be quote unquote woke in that
Yeah.
way. And it's troubling to hear if there's still that kind of bias toward protecting those in power, protecting those who are more senior, protecting a man.
Yeah. Well, I've often actually said that, if I were a man, I'd probably still be in music.
Yeah.
So, but on the other hand, had it not happened, I wouldn't have gone down this path of trying to understand empathy and working to really figure out, how could leadership use this so that something like that doesn't happen again. My goal has always been that if I can keep one person from not feeling so alone
Mhm.
and not feeling, like they're mowed under, and maybe even keep it from happening at all, then I'm doing the right things.
Yeah. And are you in sharing your story in different ways, getting that direct feedback from other people about hearing that story helps them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In some ways, I mean, in some ways, I'm glad that they feel comfortable enough to talk to me. In others, I'm sad that it happens at all.
Right.
But if we don't talk about it, it doesn't go away.
Yeah. And I mean, and protecting a professor with tenure, that's not the intent of tenure. It's really more about academic freedom than
Right.
it is, I was about to say get out of jail free card, but it's avoiding it's not meant to be carte blanche to avoid accountability
Yes. That's
for petty
correct.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. Should be.
Right. How trying to think of a delicate way to transition a little bit, but like deciding what to do next. You had said earlier that you struggled a little bit with what else to do in terms of, finding another career. It sounds like the idea of going back to French horn performance was not appealing or the right direction. So finding a different path forward, how did you explore that?
I did try to hang on to the French horn thing for a while, but then COVID happened right after. And a lot of the arts and ensembles and people that had steady jobs, people that were working
Yeah.
on like Broadway had to suddenly find ways to get by. By the time we came out of that, whatever was left was just kind of gone. So I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, if I'm being honest, I really spun out for a while. My husband did healthcare consulting at that time, and I kind of jumped on with him and did some stuff with that. And I did some jobs here and there to try and just keep benefits and that sort of thing, because that's just situation normal. But
Yeah.
the thing is even as I'm working with people and I'm watching what's happening, and especially when we were doing the consulting and I was working with physicians and administrative leaders, I kept seeing the same kinds of mistakes coming up. I kept seeing the creation of these same toxic workplaces, and it always seemed to come back to a real disconnect between people, a lack of understanding and connection, and it was like, "Well, so what is this? What is this that's missing? What is it?" And that's how I kinda came into the empathy side of things, and I was like, "Well, I don't necessarily know what I do well, but I know I student well. So I'm gonna go get a second doctorate in this so I can throw myself into it and really figure it out."
Yeah.
And ended up doing the one in interdisciplinary leadership. I'm not quite done yet. I'm working on the dissertation, but it is on empathy and leadership.
Okay.
So,
Minor
yeah.
mistake on my part for misinterpreting, I think, the bio.
Hey, it's all good. First show's about mistakes, right?
Yeah, I'm not gonna edit that out either. Well, soon we'll get to call you Doctor Doctor. That's a different musical.
Wow, I know that song though.
Yes. And when it comes to healthcare, I've done a lot of consulting in healthcare organizations myself over the last 20 years. And, sadly, there are far too many stories around it's not only physicians or surgeons, and that's certainly not every, but there are too many cases where people get away with abusive behavior because they are either in a powerful position or they bring in a lot of revenue and reputation or all of the above.
Yes.
And there are too many situations where bad behavior is excused in maybe similar ways to what you experienced. Some organizations, I think, are holding up for values and principles and saying, well, we may take a short term hit in doing the right thing and asking somebody to leave and figure out how to make up for that. But, that's it's a real dilemma that some organizations or some leaders maybe choose the expedient path or, like you said, protecting their reputation.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it isn't just something that's in one industry or another. I think anywhere you have those power dynamics, it's going to have the propensity to creep in. I mean, there's studies that talk about how people with power or with money really can lack empathy because they haven't had to flex that muscle. When you're in those kind of positions, people are willing to cover for you. People are willing to protect that. And unfortunately, it becomes a chicken and egg kind of situation. Was this
Yeah.
person like that, or did the system make him like that?
Yeah. And there's a lot of, things get reinforced and things could spiral, I guess. We see people get away with things
Yeah.
and they try more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Well,
we can.
because, well, unfortunately, because they can, everyone can fill in the blank of instances they're familiar with in the public realm or unfortunately in their own industry. So let's talk about empathy and the book again. Um, Melissa Robinson-Winemiller is titled "The Empathic Leader: How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation." I got it right that time.
Yes.
Right? What is empathy? And I mean, I would love to hear your definition, but let me also tee it up with a mistake I think people make of confusing empathy with sympathy.
Oh, yeah.
So tell
Empathy,
us.
sympathy, and compassion all get lumped together in a big ball a
Mm,
lot. Yeah. So, empathy, I think another mistake or myth that's out there a lot is that empathy is just about feeling, that
mhm.
I feel what you feel. And that's one kind of empathy. But throughout the course of empathy's evolution, there's actually been 43 different definitions.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So feelings are one, but they're not the only one. Really, what empathy is about is understanding and connection through perspective taking. Because there's like empathy, we have empathy sometimes with animals. Animals sometimes have empathy with each other. We can have a certain amount of empathy with nature. So it goes way beyond feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake that gets made a lot.
So, thinking and I like to think of myself as an empathetic person, and I would like to think as a host in general and today that I respond to your story in a empathetic way. But to your point, that goes beyond saying, "Well, I feel bad for you that you went through that." That's more of a sympathetic response, or
Yes.
yeah.
So the real difference between empathy and sympathy, empathy is when you take the perspective of the other person through their eyes. You understand, what the definition I like with that is it allows me to step out of my bubble and into yours,
Mhm.
which means that I leave my bubble behind me. Sympathy, you're taking the perspective of the other person through your own eyes.
Yeah.
So as soon as you do that, there's going to be some comparison and judgment because you're thinking of it in terms of what you know
Mhm.
instead of trying to do it in terms of as much as you can what they know, taking the perspective.
So in this case of, hearing what you went through, is it naturally more difficult for, let's say in this instance, for me, a man, to be empathetic, to understand your perspective as a woman who went through that experience? How it's I wouldn't pretend to say, "Oh, well, I can imagine what that was like." I don't think I could, but I don't think that
Yeah.
makes me on the right.
No, not at all. For 2 reasons. The first is that when you're feeling empathy, you don't necessarily have to have empathy for the situation. You're having empathy for the perspective. So if I'm saying that, in that I felt scared and I was frustrated by the system and I felt overwhelmed, I'm sure you know all of those feelings. I
Mhm.
mean, I think we all do. So the empathy is there in being able to really understand those feelings between people. The other thing is that we were saying there's more than one kind of empathy. And there's a theory that I buy into. It's called dual root model of empathy. And what it talks about is how there's really 2 that you need to have to really be empathetic. And one is emotional, which is the quick emotional, that kind of thing. But the second is cognitive empathy, which means I logically understand what you're feeling. I just may not feel anything. So
Mm.
when you say, I can imagine how you feel, or at least I can try to imagine how you feel, that is empathy. A lot of people choose not to use that cognitive one because it takes a little more effort. It's called dual root model because it actually hits the brain in 2 different ways. But yeah, absolutely. I feel you're absolutely empathetic to what was going on, even if you can't say I've ever been in that situation.
So there are in the subtitle of the book connections to EQ or emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
somebody with, and I'm not going to claim to have the highest. I'd like to say it. I'm empathetic. I'm not going to claim to have the highest level of emotional intelligence. That's I'm not going to claim that. But what are the connections? I mean, does somebody with a higher EQ tend to be more empathetic? Are those connected, or do they maybe tend to more tend to coexist even if they're not directly connected.
They do. Now, realize that with everything I'm saying, when you're dealing with behavioral stuff, you're gonna have people that agree and disagree across the board because we're
Mhm.
dealing with humans and feelings and behaviors. So there's just no black and white. But if we go back to the first time emotional intelligence was really talked about, that would have been about 95 in Daniel Goleman's book and on emotional intelligence. And in that book, he actually put empathy in as a kind of emotional
Mhm.
intelligence. He had 5 broad categories. He said empathy was in the bucket, right? If
Mhm.
you think of emotional intelligence as a big tool bag, and it's got all these different tools in there, whether it's motivation or communication or whatever. And he put empathy in the tool bag. I actually think you have to have empathy first. I think empathy needs to come out of the tool bag because if you don't understand and connect through perspective taking first, you really can't effectively reach in that tool bag and know if you're going to grab a hammer or a chisel, which I think is part of the reason why we've been talking about emotional intelligence. The first article was written in 1990. So we've been talking about this for 35 years and we still have trouble applying it consistently.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and I imagine, some people just poo-poo the idea or they make mistakes and what they think it means, or they don't really dig to learn what it
Yeah.
means. The same probably happens when it comes to thinking about empathy and leadership. I can only imagine, the pushback of somebody saying, "Oh, well, that means being soft. We can't be too empathetic. This is just business. We have to hold people accountable, blah, blah, blah."
Yes.
How do you respond to that in a helpful way if somebody pushes back like that?
That having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries.
Mhm.
Empathy doesn't mean you're just being a pushover because you're still wanting to be able to see through the other person's perspective, but while giving them what they need. And so one of my favorite examples is, talking about employee sorry, I'm s
Like performance
I was
evaluations or
thank you.
you
Oh my goodness. Yes, performance evaluations, that you will have people that just kind of allow people to slide through because, they wanna seem like they're being nice, which same thing. Empathy isn't always nice.
Mhm.
Empathy is always kind,
Yeah.
but it's not always nice. Nice is a social construct. It has more to do with greasing the wheels of society. Kind is where you're actually taking the other person's perspective into point of view and giving them what they need.
Yeah.
Well, if you're in employee reviews and what that person really needs is to be told, we want you to do well, and it's not going to happen with what you're doing. Empathy would say, I can see this through the other person's perspective. I understand that there's these other mitigating factors. And if I want to be kind, I need to help them to either reach their potential or find a
Mhm.
different place where they can reach their potential. And it
Right.
may not be here.
Right. Yeah, it wouldn't be empathetic to say. I mean, maybe there's some extreme situations where you might cut somebody some slack of like, well, they're trying really hard and they were performing great, but they're going through some hard times. But so that like that's one thing, as opposed to somebody who just isn't a good fit for a job, no matter how hard they try. The organization maybe failed them by putting them into a situation that it wouldn't be kind and constructive to just let them like, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to make them feel bad. And then boom, they get laid off at some point when you could have been more kind and constructive. And maybe if you couldn't coach them up in the role they were in, move them back into something that was perhaps a better fit where they could succeed.
Right. Yes. Because you're actually seeing it through their eyes that most people want to do well. They want to
Yeah.
succeed. They want to get better. And sometimes every one of us needs someone to be able to say, we need to reassess this whole thing. And that's not a failure necessarily of either person. It's more just creating a collaborative environment where both can thrive, even if that happens to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Wanted to go back a little bit, Melissa, something you were saying earlier, kind of, talking about, people in power. So we're talking about workplaces and that could be, people who have risen through many levels of leadership over their career. They're in a position of formal power. How often do you think, I mean, I'm asking you to generalize, but like, is it inevitable that somebody becomes less empathetic? Is it likely or,
It really depends on the person.
Yeah.
It seems to really depend on the amount of self-awareness,
Which is an
because
aspect of EQ again, right?
yes. Yep, understanding how your act because if we go back to the very first definition of EQ, it's understanding and controlling your emotions and understanding the emotions of others. So within that, with that self-awareness, it is understanding, if I get triggered by this person and I trip off in a meeting, what's the results gonna be? If I do give everybody a pass on their employee evaluations, then how are my actions influencing the world in the workplace? So I don't think it has to be that way
Mhm.
if, we're actually working through self-awareness and understanding the effect that we have on the world around us.
Yeah. And I imagine people that more naturally seek out and accept feedback from others would probably be less likely to fall down, this path of losing their empathy. If like if somebody, whether they have a formal leadership coach or a mentor, or if they create an environment where they welcome feedback from their colleagues and their employees to call them out on something, or maybe that allows someone to course correct and not get too far off track.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that outside influence come in. That way you're not in an echo chamber. You're
Yeah.
not just getting it all the same thing back all the time. On the other hand, I was working with an organization not that long ago, and they had a stack of employee feedback forms, and they looked at it and they were like, "Oh, well, that's sad." And then they just set it aside. And it's like, yeah, that's just getting the feedback isn't enough. What are you going to
Sure.
do with that feedback?
Sure. Are there ways that people in general or leaders can set out to become more empathetic? If so.
Yes. So keeping in mind that, empathy is understanding and connection through perspective taking. What I try to teach my clients is that the first place to start is self-empathy, because a lot of people miss that. And if you can't give empathy to yourself, how are you going to know how to give it to anybody else? And you get people that are in leadership positions that are very ambitious, they're driven. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy, they're highly self actualized, they're up there at the top. They've worked to get where they're at. And because of that, sometimes they lose that connection and understanding with themselves, which is why now we're dealing with burnout and we deal with substance abuse and we deal with families breaking up and that kind of thing. So when I'm teaching self empathy, I give 4 steps, but with the caveat
Mhm.
that this is not a one and done. This is a iterative, you do it over and over and over kind of thing. And the first step is self-observation. So the idea is to step back, take a different perspective, and just watch yourself. Just take in data. I call it being critical, not caring, because you're like a computer. You're taking in information, you're taking in data. You are not assigning judgment. You are not assigning emotion because a lot of these leaders understand that they're maybe not doing the best they can, and in comes imposter syndrome and judgment and the other things that can come up. So, critical, not caring, just observing what's happening.
Mhm.
The next step is self reflection. So, you turn the lens inward and you try to figure out what your relation is to how these things happen. Someone triggered me in a meeting. I completely came unhinged. Why?
Mhm.
What is it that pushed me to that point?
Mhm.
After you can reflect on this, you turn the lens out to self awareness. Okay, now I see what I did. How did I affect the world? Did I motivate my employees or did I just make them all scared of me? Are they going to be more or less likely to come to me with innovative ideas? That
Mhm.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then once you get to that point, then you can actually employ self empathy, which may mean having self compassion. I let that person push my buttons and I shouldn't have, but it was a mistake. Or self forgiveness, or maybe it's a matter of figuring out what happened and asking for forgiveness. What happens within that state of self empathy could be a lot of different things.
Mhm.
But those are the kind of steps that we go through because you've got to understand your place in the world and how you affect others if you wanna be able to actually take that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really clear. I like the way you laid that out. And for people that want a deeper dive into self compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff was a guest in this
Oh,
podcast
yeah.
series, and that's one of her areas of expertise with her writing. and teaching. So I encourage people check that out. Kristen Neff again is her name. And Melissa, one other question I wanted to ask, because we talk in this podcast about learning from mistakes and leadership and the culture involved in that. How can leaders use empathy or be more empathetic when mistakes happen? Like when, say, somebody on their team makes a mistake, what would an empathic leader do that would lead to your point, somebody being more likely to continue mentioning mistakes instead of shutting down and hiding them?
I think it's important for leaders to understand that in every mistake is a learning opportunity. And we grow and we learn, and that's how we get better, all of us together, both singly and together. But it takes empathy to be able to look at that and say, yeah, that's a learning opportunity. Let's figure it out together. This was, I mean, if it's the kind of mistake where someone is doing the same thing over and over and they're not listening, that's a different situation. But where it's, this was a one off, let's discuss it. Let's figure out how to not let this happen again. Let's actually grow and do better and be better, and that goes for themselves too. I made this mistake. This did not work. I'm really sorry for what happened, but let's go back and figure it out and be better together.
One other thing I wanted to ask, examples where, let's say, a leader made a mistake where a lack of empathy in a situation maybe turned a small mistake or a small problem into something bigger.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, when you think about some of the big toxic leadership situations that have happened, whether it's, in countries or governmental or, I mean, even through history. The one that comes up with me a lot when I think about it is like Enron. There was zero empathy not only for their employees, they didn't care what happened to their employees, but not only that, their customers, their board, everybody. It didn't matter the fallout that was coming. They had no perspective of how devastating this was going to be and to how many people.
Yeah.
We can actually think of a lot of examples of really bad leadership like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I admire leaders who I've met, leaders of companies large and relatively small, who take very seriously that obligation of, like, you've started a company or you're running a company. How many people's lives, you talked earlier, half jokingly, but the serious point, we all want food, clothing, and shelter. We all need that. There's a responsibility
Yes,
as
that's
a
why.
leader. Does that mean that leader is kind of high in the empathy scale to think about, the decisions I make and our success as a company isn't just about, on one level, being, making more money and having a reputation, but like, boy, we're, people really rely on us, not just, the paychecks and for the food on their table and for the roof over their head. Some leaders probably don't think about that at all, but the ones who do, are they more empathetic?
Oh, I would say so. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, because they're taking that other perspective, which is why I would actually argue for a leader to really be empathetic. They want that business to thrive. They want,
Mhm.
that doesn't doing dirty things to get it there, but, you
Right.
know, a business's point goal is to bring in money and keep people employed and keep the product and service going. So, wanting to do well, wanting to make that money, wanting to make sound business decisions is part of being empathetic to your people because you all wanna thrive together.
Yeah. And, it comes to that ethics piece. We talk about not doing things dirty just to make money. I mean, people who worked at Enron or Theranos, to think of a
Oh, yeah.
recent example, even if they didn't, quote unquote, do anything wrong, and if they didn't go to jail, there's probably still a reputational hit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you read Bad Blood by John
And,
Carreyrou?
uh,
Some of what was going on in Theranos, I mean, the lack of empathy was there very early on, and just people were refusing to see it.
and yeah, does an extreme lack of empathy, does that equal words that people throw around like sociopath? Or I mean, is zero empathy equal sociopath? Is it just related?
Yes, it's exactly related. That's part of the definition for dark triad, and dark triad is Sociopaths, psychopaths, Machiavellians, and narcissists. So, yeah, I mean, the way people kind of throw words like psychopath or narcissist around, it isn't necessarily, by definition what's going on in the dark triad, but part of dark triad is they have no empathy. So, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big part of it.
I mean, I think there has been research from people that know and use these terms properly that unfortunately executive ranks in certain professions tend to attract sociopaths, psychopaths, etc.
Yes.
And they do a lot of harm.
Yes. High level leadership, certain medical positions, and high levels in government.
Mhm.
So they figure that they used to say about 5% of the population fell into the like actual diagnosable dark triad. Now they're saying it may be more like 7 to 8, but in some of those high level positions, it can be like 20 to 25%.
Yeah. And there's I guess that classic question of, are the numbers of people increasing or is it just more detected and recognized? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, are there generational or societal trends when it comes to empathy? Do young people tend to, I don't know. No, I don't. Well, here, I'll just ask you as a question, like generational or age-based differences when it comes to levels of empathy.
It depends on who you ask, but there are several authors like Jean Twenge who definitely feel that it is generational, particularly because of technology and social media and the iPhone, because it creates main character syndrome. There was a study that happened as well, and it's a longitudinal study. So it started in the 70s and it went to about 2008. And they were looking at incoming college students. And what this study found was that within that time, the amount of empathy with that population went down by 40%. But they are continuing on with that study, and they think now maybe they're seeing an upswing. I don't know.
And large societal events or, think back to things that, can be traumatic to individuals and groups. Let's say, the COVID epidemic, I could see different groups of people going in one direction or the other. That experience might make somebody more empathetic in different ways or less so.
It could go either way. I mean, for the first time, a lot of these organizations had to be empathetic because they didn't have a choice with everything that was going on and people having to go home and this they had to be able to show empathy. But I mean, the flip side of that is all of a sudden we were all cloistered off. The Society for Human Resource Management had an article that said that workplace incivility is at the highest point that it's been, like since they started looking at it. So, it's kind of again, it's kind of both sides of it.
Mhm. Well, it's really been great to explore empathy with you here today. Our guest again has been Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. Sincerely thank you for sharing your story in the first part of the episode. I imagine it's not an easy story to tell, but thank you for sharing your reflections and the spirit of helping others who would hear what you have to say. And the book again is titled The Empathic Leader: How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation. And maybe as a final note, and I'll put the link in the show notes, your TEDx talk is now online, right?
Yes, it just actually came out last Monday, so it's been about 6 months since I did it, and it talks about self-empathy and self-judgment, and we've got 33,000 views in 8 days, which is exciting because it means people want to hear more about it, which is what I want.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to check that out. I just learned, to the listener, I just learned right before we started recording. So I didn't have the chance to go check it out, but I will go do that as soon as you send me the link, Melissa. Thank you in advance. And I will put that in the show notes for others, encourage people to check that out. Link to Melissa's website and more. Again, check out the show notes. So, Melissa, thank you again for a great episode. I'm trying to wedge in another Spinal Tap reference, but not thinking of one. Do you have one? No, I'm gonna get ending it awkwardly.
No, I'll admit the best part of Spinal Tap for me was just watching some of the goofy stuff they did, whether it was getting stuck in one of the pods or the Stonehenge or the it was like, yeah, or how they started out in the huge arenas and then by the end they're like playing these tiny little houses.
Yes. And it's not because their musical is less popular. I think the line is something like their appeal is just becoming more highly selective.
Yes. As a French hornist, I can appreciate that.
Melissa, thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was my pleasure, Mark, and I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks.